G'day you mob, Pete here, and this is another episode of Aussie English, the number one place for anyone and everyone wanting to learn Australian English. So today I have a Goss episode for you where I sit down with my old man, my father, Ian Smissen, and we talk about the week's news, whether locally down under here in Australia or non-locally overseas in other parts of the world. Okay, and we sometimes also talk about whatever comes to mind, right? If we can think of something interesting to share with you guys related to us or Australia, we also talk about that in the Goss. So these episodes are specifically designed to try and give you content about many different topics where we're obviously speaking in English and there are multiple people having a natural and spontaneous conversation in English. So it is particularly good to improve your listening skills. In order to complement that though, I really recommend that you join the podcast membership or the academy membership at aussieenglish.com.au, where you will get access to the full transcripts of these episodes, the PDFs, the downloads, and you can also use the online PDF reader to read and listen at the same time. Okay, so if you really, really want to improve your listening skills fast, get the transcript, listen and read at the same time, keep practicing, and that is the quickest way to level up your English. Anyway, I've been rabbiting on a bit. I've been talking a bit. Let's just get into this episode, guys. Smack the bird, and let's get into it. We are all good to go. Dad, I have a kombucha, and a kefir. I'm still yet to work out what kefir is.
No idea.
Probiotic.
It's probably just another version of kefir, and yeah, I don't know. I got no idea.
I like it better. So
you're not going to hear that from me very often, but
I know. Is it the first time you've ever said that? I don't know, Dad?
No. It's the third.
All right. So cheers.
Cheers.
How have you been?
Not bad. Bloody hay fever's playing up again. I don't know why. That's because normally it's north windy days.
Yeah.
Which
you up. Huh?
We had yesterday, and it wasn't too bad, but today's awful. So if I fall asleep after 20 minutes,
you've taken the drugs. Huh?
I have. Yes. So should be all right.
Antihistamines. Yeah. Far out. Well, I guess we can probably start with the story that I have down the bottom here. So I've got 3 today. Rental house prices soaring due to coronavirus exodus from cities, but some locals now living in cars and tents. So this makes sense because we're about to move house, and that's sort of tied in.
You've been the victim of this as well.
Yeah, to some degree. I don't know. I guess we are. I guess we can talk about that story first, and then we can go through this article online. But effectively, we were contacted by our realtor or the agent.
Yes.
So not the landlord, but the agent that works between the two. And he was effectively like, are you guys okay to move out on February the 8th or by February the 8th? Mm-hmm. And at the time, the way in which it was worded made it sound like we had no real option and that was happening. And then we ended up, I think this would have been around just before Christmas Day.
December. Yeah.
And Kel met with the neighbours and was chatting to them about it. And they were like, well, you've got some rights. You don't have to move out. I think they're not allowed to kick you out because of COVID.
Yeah.
Unless they apply to, is it VCAT?
Yes.
Victorian something or other. Yeah. And so we ended up sort of pushing back a bit and saying, look, we're waiting. We're going to wait for the official letter that is asking us to move out. And when we asked for that, he said, oh, well, I can't do that legally.
Yeah.
And we were like, okay. So you're effectively asking us to do you and the landlord a massive favour and move out when we don't have to move
what's
out.
In it for you?
Yeah, and we get nothing out of it except for a headache.
Mm-hmm.
So we were like, in the end, we said, look, clearly this is what you guys want to do. I think to let you guys know that the story we were given is that the landlord wants his son to be able to live here. So whether that's paying, what we're currently paying, but living in this place, I assume he's from Melbourne as well, like the landlords.
Presume so, yeah. Which is, just to interrupt you, is the COVID aside, that's typically the only reason, other than your misbehaviour, the only reason that a landlord can give you short-term notice to move out is either they want or a family member wants to move into the house.
Or they're selling it, I guess. But even then, they may have to sell it and you get to stay in the house.
Yeah.
Until your lease or whatever ends. So Yeah.
Which is effectively the same thing, because if they're selling it, they're actually just saying, we want to take over the house again.
Yeah.
So...
Well, and that's what I was wondering. I'm like, I wonder if they are doing the dodge somehow and they're using this as an excuse to be able to do something like that.
No, I doubt it. I think they probably do have their son moving in, but and that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do.
Yeah.
But under present circumstances, you say under the COVID laws in Victoria at the moment, you can't evict tenants.
Yeah.
You have to go to VCAT, which is the Victorian Civil Administration Tribunal.
There you go. Where were you earlier?
Yeah, well, I've woken up. And that's the government trying. It's the layer below a court of law. That you can apply for a legal decision as to whether something can happen. And it's typical where you get small claims go to. So you don't want to go to the magistrate's court if you've got a problem, with somebody not paying their, your neighbour doesn't pay for half their fence when you got it repaired or that sort of thing. So it's the same thing. And under the law at the moment, that VCAT actually has to give you a 60-day eviction notice, and that will only occur under special circumstances that they've agreed to. And typically, I think a family member moving in would not be one of those cases. They would need to show, it could be that, the person's lost their job, they found a job in Geelong or Ocean Grove or whatever, then that would be taken into consideration is my understanding. But so clearly they don't want to go to VCAT. The agent or the landlord don't want to go to VCAT.
Well, and they probably want to do it sooner than they're allowed to legally because of the COVID restrictions, which I think lasted until the end of March. And so that would be 60 days notice from the end of March that we would have. So
effectively got to the middle of the year before you had to do anything.
But knowing that they obviously wanted to do this, Kel and I were like, you know what? All right, we're gonna try and find somewhere in the meantime. But worst case scenario, if we don't find somewhere that's around the same price range and within the same distance of mum and dad and our friends and family here in Ocean Grove, then we're not going to be forced to move out. But that was the other aspect of it, which ties in with this article and the fact that rent has just gone through the roof, and that I think what I was reading, which I'll get into in a bit, where they were saying that rental vacancies hit zero for a while down here, meaning that there were no houses available. They'd all been taken.
And that's supply and demand as well, that rental costs go up when the supply won't meet the demand.
So, anyway, we ended up applying to a crap load of different places all over the Bellarine Peninsula and Geelong. We got accepted for one that was in Geelong, but then changed our minds after that because we were like, it is a bit far away.
And it was small as well.
And it was a bit small. So the good news is we found somewhere recently in Curlewis, absolutely awesome house, pretty affordable. I think we're paying $5 less a week, I guess. And for transparency, we currently pay $450 a week for this house, a 4-bedroom house in Ocean Grove, which in light of the recent market is an insanely good price for a 4-bedroom house in Ocean Grove, although it's old and not up to, I don't know, what we probably want.
And it also, it's old and there's been very little renovation done on it and so on. But, there's nothing wrong with the house.
We would have stayed here until we'd bought somewhere, I think. So anyway, we ended up finding this place for $445. The cool thing that I was just talking to Dad about was that, the annoying / cool thing was that we were trying to be more competitive because we kept getting knocked back for certain applications where they would just say, unfortunately there's been a better offer or they picked someone else. And so we had to kind of come up with ways to sweeten the deal. And we're thinking about, okay, do we just add $10, $15 a week because we can afford to do that? We were expecting to pay more anyway. Do we say we'll pay 6 months in advance, 12 months in advance? Do we offer to sign a 1-year, 2-year lease? And the interesting thing with the place in Curlewis, which I was surprised about, was that Kel and I offered to pay $460 a week, so $15 extra, doing our bit to also push the market up. And to pay 6 months in advance because we've been saving up money for a house. We've got that there, but I thought, we can probably take from that to pay rent in advance if it's going to give us a house, and we can just save up again in the period we don't have to pay rent for that 6 months or whatever. And we offered that and they ended up refusing it, but giving us the house. They said, we want you to live there, but we don't want you to pay more than we've got it at, and we don't want it 6 months in advance or anything, just pay as it is. Well, it's fine. And I was pretty surprised about that.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you've got a good landlord.
Well, and the real estate agent, she seems like a lovely girl too. So. Yeah, because she sent me a thing. She was she say the other day? She's like, we've got a sandpit there. Did you guys want to keep that? And Kel's wanting to get one for Noah. So I was like, yeah, we'll keep it. And she said, oh, well, the owners want to refresh the sand and, make it as nice as possible and everything too. So I was actually really
good,
heartened to see that we've got some kick-ass landlords and agents. Anyway, so this story was that house prices, as you guys have probably just become aware, in regional and coastal Australia have skyrocketed in the past year as families and retirees have swapped European holidays for new homes, but it's creating a crisis in one Queensland region. So this is happening apparently in places like the Grampians of Victoria, Noosa and the Noosa hinterland in Queensland. I assume the Noosa hinterland is inland?
Yeah, inland, inland from the sea. Yeah.
Noosa's ridiculously expensive.
Yes.
My ex-girlfriend's parents bought there, and I remember, I think Pat Rafter lives there, and he bought his house back in the early 2000s for like $5 million. From what I heard. Don't hate me, Pat, if you're watching this. The York Peninsula in South Australia and Maranoa in southwest Queensland, all of those places went up 13% in less than 12 months, which is crazy, right? And they said the Grampians was actually the winner of 16.6% increase in the year to December the 31st. Which is insane.
Yeah, and just to give our listeners and viewers a bit of a geography lesson, the Grampians is an isolated little mountain range in Western Victoria, which mountain ranges stuck in the middle of nowhere are always going to be attractive places to go. Yeah. They effectively create their own weather, so it's you've got forest and things up on the range slopes.
Had some bad bushfires probably about a decade ago.
Yeah. And a few, they get bushfires there every year, but the bad ones about 10 years ago.
It's a beautiful place to live, though. I wouldn't mind if it wasn't in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, and it's a typical holiday place for people from Melbourne and from Adelaide because it's about halfway between.
Any of you guys living in Victoria will know of it as a destination to go to. It tends to be Wilson's Prom, the 12 Apostles and the Great Ocean Road, and then the Grampians.
Yeah, but it's very small in terms of population. Halls Gap is really the only town in the Grampians area stuck in the middle of the national park. And so it would probably typically only have, I suspect, a few hundred houses that would be for sale or for rent at any particular time. And
it must be a total gift and a curse, right? Where they would just get smashed during tourist season.
Like we do down here.
Yeah, and I was about to bring that up. But how do you feel, before we get back on track with this story, do you feel like it's something that I remember growing up and calling them touros, right? Tourists.
The invaders.
Bloody touros. Born and raised 3226, our postcode. Yeah. People would have those sorts of stickers on their cars. But, excuse me again, damn Kiefer. You kind of forget that the entire... Well, not entire, but the majority of the economy in these sorts of towns relies on tourists, right?
Yeah.
So it is a pretty ironic thing that we hate on them, but at the same time, you kind of need them to survive.
Yeah. And look, we've got that advantage. So, January, it's not horrible, but it's just really busy. And, it's hard to get a car park in the supermarket areas, the beaches, obviously, which are going to have anyway. You've got 10,000 people on Ocean Grove Beach some days.
You can't put a towel down on the sand.
You can't even go and sit on the beach unless you get there early in the morning. But what it does mean is that for the other 11 months of the year, and taking out a few public holidays in the middle, we've got a very pleasant lifestyle with shops and services that simply would not be there to maintain just the residential population. We've got how many cafes? There's probably 20 cafes just down the main street, which only has about 50 shops in it. And there's no way they would all be there if January and Easter didn't happen. So, we've got a choice for that. We've got, boutiques, surf shops, those sort of things that we just wouldn't have.
Yeah, I'm actually impressed. There's one on the main street here called the Green Room, and that's been around, I think, from memory, the sign says EST, established in 1994, 1996, so it's been there for good innings.
I don't know when it was established, but it was there when we first got here.
It must be before 96 then.
Yeah, and that was 96, so it's been around for a long time.
So how do you see it, though? Do you feel like, especially in light of what's happening with COVID, that these sort of towns are going to lose their... they're going to still have their appeal and the reason to come here, but do you think they're going to lose a bit of the essence that they had once upon a time? And I'm sure they probably already lost what they were. Well, yeah, I suppose. I
mean, Ocean Grove, where we live, is probably twice the size in population as it was 25 years ago when we moved down here.
Yeah.
So there's that element to it, and at the same time, you'd look at it and go, well, double the growth in 25 years isn't too bad for what was a reasonably small town that was really a holiday town. More than half the houses in Ocean Grove when we moved down here were non-residential. They were holiday houses.
And half the blocks of land were vacant with plovers nesting on them, other birds.
Exactly. So it was sort of inevitable it was going to happen. But, the natural environment hasn't changed. The beaches are still here. The bushland around us is not being taken over for development. The only things that are happening with development is farmland. Now, that it means you're losing that sort of rural feel. You could sort of drive into Ocean Grove and you went from farmland into suburbia very quickly.
Now
the suburbia is just getting further and further away from that sort of town.
Well, we feel like all those towns are joining up, right? Because we have these towns on the Bellarine Peninsula here, which for those of you who don't know, is the left side of the opening of Port Phillip Bay. So it's this, obviously, a peninsula of mostly, it's much bigger than the other side where you'll have Sorrento, which is a thin sort of stick.
Yeah, half the Mornington Peninsula is really just this little skinny bit that's pointing to us.
Whereas our side's a fat side. But we
had a big hippopotamus with its mouth open.
True. But we've got a bunch of towns and they're slowly starting to sort of connect up with suburbia.
Yeah, well, where you're moving into Curlewis is really just now an outer suburb of Clifton Springs, which is now merged with Drysdale. And so there's all these little towns that have been there for a long time. They've been settled for a long time. But
there were farms once between them, separating them all.
Now they're all just suburbia. But
so anyway, people apparently are getting sick and tired of big cities like Melbourne, and they were sick of them even before COVID. And there has been this big shift to working from home at the same time as people freaking out about the pandemic and being in built-up large areas with big populations. And then also, apparently, at least in Melbourne, people are getting sick and tired of the lockdowns or the threat of a lockdown like that. So many of the people who moved out to the Grampians were retirees, but they were also families and young people trying to either downsize or upsize and find more space.
Yeah. And realistically, it's, while the demand has gone up in rural and regional Victoria and other states, and the costs have gone up, but the cost of rent in most towns in Victoria and other states is way less than what it is in the major cities.
Yeah.
And certainly for buying a house, it's ridiculous, the difference between them. So, and that's always been an attraction. For the last 30 years, the so-called tree change and sea change, where people were moving out to the coast or out to the country, mostly for economic reasons. And I think the one thing that has come out of COVID that will change the way we live and work for the future is that people have realised, both individual people working themselves, but also companies have realised that it's okay, you can survive working from home.
Yeah.
That productivity doesn't go down. In fact, in some cases, it probably goes up.
And their overheads probably go down.
Their overheads go down. You don't have to pay for huge office space, maintaining office equipment and all of those sort of things. So, I think that has meant that people have said, well, I can move out to the Grampians, provided I've got an internet connection. I can still work. There might be times where I have to go to Melbourne for a couple of days or whatever. I'd rather do that and pay for a night's accommodation in a hotel than to live there at double the rent for the rest of my life.
Do you think that's going to change significantly? Do you think this pattern's only going to continue into the future?
Oh, look, I think there will be a move back into office space, but I think that it will be people will be able to work from home part-time, 2 or 3 days a week at home, 2 or 3 days a week in the office. There'll be some people who will permanently work from home. I think it will change the way people look at it and say, well, from a family life point of view, maybe I can work 4 days a week, work in the evenings on 1 day a week so that I can make up the fifth day and so on, because I can do it all from home. And, depending on your job, clearly if you're a teacher or a nurse, now teachers, of course, have been in a situation where having to teach remotely, but That's not going to change in a hurry for, primary schools and secondary schools. But if you're a nurse or a doctor and so on, you're hands-on with your customers. You can't just sort of go, oh, well, sorry, patients, we're not going to see you today. I'll just ring you. In many cases, that'll work for a general checkup and things. You need to go in and get your blood pressure taken. Unless everybody's got a blood pressure meter at home, that's not going to work and so on. But for a lot of people who are typical office workers who are, I hesitate to, it sounds derogatory, but paper shufflers, people who are just taking, a bunch of work to do that they can do on a computer at home or a computer at work, there's no reason to be at work.
Yeah. Do you think it's going to erode then the typical 9 to 5 idea of what work is?
I hope so.
Yeah, because how long has that been around? Probably since factories, the industrial age, right?
Yeah, well, historically, people used to work 12-hour days.
Jesus.
They'd work 6 till 6 or 7 till 7.
Mm-hmm.
And then, particularly, at least in Australia, our Labor Day, the public holiday that we call Labor Day, was in celebration of the 8-hour day. Where unions fought to say that, working 12 hours a day is ridiculous. People should only have to work 8 hours a day. And that became the norm. And that's where the 9 to 5 started to happen.
Yeah.
And so, and we've done that for, close to 100 years now. In most Western countries, that's the sort of norm. Although for people who are working in sort of senior management and executive positions, they'll tell you that they work 24 hours a day. You're never off, in many businesses. I mean, yourself, The only
good thing is
work at 9 and finish at 5?
Well, you just sort of do it when you need to do it.
Exactly.
You just mix it up, which is, again, that gift and a curse kind of thing.
Yeah, that's right. It's an advantage, but it's a disadvantage. So I think that sort of flexibility of work is going to become much more prevalent now that we've gone through this disaster of economic and health disaster for the last 12 months. But we've realised that you can work in a different way, and that will start to become normalised rather than the exception.
The last part of this was them talking to a real estate agent from Noosa who was saying that he's getting people buying houses where they've only seen photos. They haven't even been there because of lockdowns.
Yes.
He was selling properties for between $6 and $8 million each. One of the most expensive ones he sold unseen was $10 million. And he was saying that Noosa's rising prices are seeing people sleeping in cars and tents. Yeah, I guess I was wanting to ask you what your opinions are of these beautiful places. Do you think we're going to end up with a sort of fracturing in terms of classes, or the wealthy and affluent in society having access to these kinds of places more and more and more as house prices go up? Or do you think
they always have.
Yeah.
It's what we're finding now. Is that if you look at let's just take the suburbs of Melbourne. The most expensive suburbs in Melbourne are the inner city suburbs along the Yarra River, Toorak, South Yarra, and the bayside suburbs like Brighton, Beaumaris, Black Rock, Sandringham. They've traditionally been the most expensive suburbs for a long time.
Yeah.
And that's because they're the prettiest places to live. There's no doubt that that's the case. 50 years ago, you could buy a place on the Great Ocean Road for almost nothing. Now you'd be pushing to buy a house that had an ocean view.
Yeah.
Then you'd be pushing to buy a house for under $1.5 to $2 million.
And go to Lawn.
You can go and buy a suburban place out the back of some of these places reasonably cheaply still, but then you're just buying because of proximity, not because of the views and so on that you get. So there's always going to be a premium on the location in real estate. It's just now spreading out to places where, Noosa is a classic example of 30 years ago, you could have bought a place at Noosa for, under $100,000.
Jesus.
Now, yes, many other places have gone up as well, but Noosa has probably gone up 10 times in value or more, 20 times in value because of just demand.
Yeah.
A limited supply. One of the advantages of Noosa, as opposed to a lot of the other places along that Sunshine Coast in Queensland, is that when Noosa was established as a settlement, there was a national park there. And so that national park is permanent.
It can't expand out.
So there's a premium on land, and Noosa is really just stuck between a national park and a river.
Yeah.
And so yes, you can move out, and there will be places. The hinterland is now expanding, so you can go and move 10 kilometres away from the coast and get a quite reasonable place to live and cheaply. But that's not why people go to Noosa. They go there for the forest and the beach. So,
yeah, it is interesting. I've noticed in Ocean Grove, I think since I was young, I don't know if gentrification is the right word, but it definitely feels like the lower aspect or lower class sort of population has been slowly pushed out. You know, like there are a few guys that I worked at the pizza shop with who I still see working at the pizza shop, and I don't imagine that they are still renting in places like Ocean Grove. I would imagine they're probably commuting in from elsewhere nearby because the prices have left them where their jobs haven't increased. Do you think there's going to be a sort of a roof to that where wages obviously aren't increasing at the same rate that housing is, especially now that house loans, or the interest on house loans is at what, 1% or 0?
Yeah, 1 to 2% for just about any bank or any financial institution.
Yeah. What do you expect is going to happen with that? Because there's not really much further down they can go. And if the prices go back up,
well, I mean, there's a balance between interest rates and housing prices. The reason that housing prices will go up based on supply and demand, but people can only pay what they can afford. And the reason they can afford it at the moment is that interest rates are so low. So if interest rates go up, then housing prices will drop. Not significantly because they just haven't in the past based on supply and demand. So it's a bit of a balance there. But, if the demand is high and attractive places to live are always going to have high demand, then there's not much you can do about it, unfortunately. And we continue to have an expanding population. This is not just the population of Melbourne isn't going to reduce significantly by the regional areas increasing because the population of Victoria continues to grow. It's Melbourne, and even when I grew up, Melbourne had a population of under 2 million people when I was a kid. It's now nearly 5 million, and it's not going to drop below 5 million. The populations of regional towns like Geelong and Ballarat and Shepparton and Bendigo and Warrnambool and Echuca and Mildura and places like that they'll continue to go up, but so will Melbourne, because Melbourne is still a very attractive place for people to live.
Do you think it's only really holding on by the number of new suburbs being created then by developers?
Oh, it is, yeah, and that's what's going to happen. And they're getting further and further out. Eventually, there's going to be a change in that, and maybe the change has already started to happen with the working from home. So you can have. There are suburbs now in Greater Melbourne and in Greater Sydney that is 2 hours drive to get into the city. And that's
about
not
as far as here from Melbourne.
That's not it's further. It's further. It's not further in distance, but it's just further because you're in traffic all the way. And so if you've got 4 or 5 hours of travelling a day, then people are going to look and go, I don't want to live there. Or if I do, I don't want to travel into the city.
What's the expression? The juice isn't worth the squeeze.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there will be a change in housing, but that's not going to happen in a hurry because we still have this great Australian dream of the quarter-acre block, even though they're no longer a quarter of an acre. But we, our own private house on our own private land with a backyard, and if you've got the money and the inclination, a swimming pool, or all those sort of things. So people still have that ambition. I think if we move out of that, and many cities in Europe are doing the same thing, and they have for the last 50 years or more.
Well, it's not the case in Britain, right? Yeah. You go there and the houses are nowhere near our size. They tend to be very thin and tall and
a lot
packed
more expensive in the big cities. But where you can have this sort of medium density housing, where you can have people, living in 6 townhouses on what we would call a double block or a triple block, but you have a shared open space with maybe one swimming pool and a barbecue area, and you can even throw in a tennis court, or a play area and those sort of things. But that means that you've got 3 times the number of people living in the same area, but you've got to share the resources that we would typically expect to have for ourselves.
All right. Well, I guess that's enough for this episode. But it's interesting seeing the way in which COVID is changing the world.
It is.
In these unforeseen ways.
For better and for worse.
Exactly. Guys, don't forget, if you want the transcripts and the downloads for these episodes and the bonus Goss episodes, we'll be publishing a few of those each week for members only. Don't forget to sign up for the premium podcast or the academy at aussieenglish.com.au. See you later.
See ya.
Alrighty, you mob. Thank you so much for listening to or watching this episode of The Goss. If you would like to watch the video, if you're currently listening to it and not watching it, you can do so on the Aussie English TV channel on YouTube. This is different from the main channel. You'll be able to subscribe to that. Just search Aussie English TV on YouTube. And if you're watching this and not listening to it, you can check this episode out also on the Aussie English podcast, which you can find via my free Aussie English podcast application on both Android and iPhone. You can download that for free, or you can find it via any other good podcast app that you've got on your phone. Spotify, podcasts from iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is. I'm your host, Pete. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a ripper of a day, and I will see you next time. Peace!